this is something that I need. How do I build it? And then I started thinking about that. And so now I think I understand what this is all about. I think I get it now.
Welcome to the LabVIEW Experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes. So I am here today with Dr. G. I met Dr. G probably a year or two ago through my business coach, Nate. And Dr. G does a lot of work in the UI UX field, and I thought that would be very interesting to our listeners. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you go there and maybe start with a little bit of your background and what brought you into the tech scene and UI UX stuff, and what kind of lessons we can learn from all of that.
Yeah, all right. Good. So I was originally a psychologist, actually, and I was planning on doing private practice and going that whole career route when I was in my second year of my pre-doc, and I was working with cancer patients. And all throughout our individual sessions, I kept hearing, I really want to get a second opinion, but I'm scared to go back to my original doctor because I might not get good care if they know I'm going out for a second opinion. And I thought that was terrible. Like, you shouldn't have to handle that while you're also going through cancer. So that was my first idea of tech, which I was like, I'm going to build an app. There's got to be an app for this. So I started like drawing out an app on a piece of paper, kind of looking like a dating app where you could match with your doctor on different things, not just insurance and specialty. So you could match with them on, they believed in, cannabis or essential oils or long walks in the ocean, nature prescriptions, something like that. And then you could also like break up with your doctor in a very similar way, which you didn't have to have this face-to-face conversation of transfer my records and all this other stuff. So trying to basically anonymize this like breaking up with your doctor. And I entered into what I didn't know at the time, but an accelerator. And I didn't go far, but I still made it past the like, thanks for entering stage. And so they gave me some feedback. And I was like, wow, this is a really interesting space to be in. And I already knew I didn't want to do psychology because I knew that private practice was not for me because like I look back on it now, but like the iteration part wasn't there. Like I could have the same 8 weeks of conversations and there would be no change in somebody. And I just couldn't work with that, right? So I knew that the private practice route wasn't for me. What I didn't know that tech was going to actually be my path. So after I graduated, I continued my private practice and I actually continued to see cancer patients and their caregivers, which was pretty cool. But then I started working with a startup company called X2AI, and they were, I think, one of like the second or third chatbot companies at the time. So I think it was like Robot and then some other one, and then Ben, which was doing like mental health and chatbots. So it's like, it's pretty cool. And the woman who was working there, who later became my best friend, she said, do you mind creating a module for people who are going through like breast cancer, so newly diagnosed breast cancer and loneliness? And I was like, oh yeah, sure, I can totally do that. I didn't know what a module was, but I knew that I could like create whatever it was that they were looking for. And then I ended up really enjoying that. And I said, like, I want to do more and became an intern there. So I just graduated and then became an intern all over again. So I was, what I didn't know at the time, a conversational designer. So I was designing conversations for these chatbots to have. I was working on the flows and understanding what records were, and then working with software engineers to understand like how that flow was then going to become a program. And it became something I was super interested in. Well, looking at the backlog of conversations was where we went to look to see how the chatbot was learning. Like if she missed something, then we could go back and kind of figure out, was it a misspelled word? And then add it to what we call the record list, so that later the chatbot would then learn that, smile was S-M-I-L-E, but it could also be S-I-M-L-E, right? So we tried to do that. But in looking at the backlog, we kept missing these very long conversations. And so what we realized as a team was that people were wanting to vent, but the chatbot wasn't picking that up. So it would pick up like the very first thing it said or the very last thing that the person had typed in. And so we discovered as a team, like maybe if we say like after, 200 characters or whatever, that the chatbot will then say, hey, it looks like you want some space to vent. Would you like to keep talking? And so we tested that, and it turns out the users were like, yes. And so we got it. We really like tapped into the users. We looked at the backlog, and then we created something. And that was my very first time where I was like, this is 100% absolutely what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, because it made sense to me. But I also didn't have to lose the psychology part right away. So I was really lucky that I got to take my psychology with me in tech. I don't think a lot of people have that same experience. They have to kind of just be really all technical. And so they don't get to explore that side of that, like human factors or the human engineering that they may have wanted to do. So I worked there. It was awesome. And then I ended up getting a job at Google, actually, and working on their hardware. So I was UX researcher on Google's hardware team, where I was working on their surfaces, their tablets, and keyboards, which was not exciting at all. But here's what happened, which was super cool and interesting, is that when I was doing one of these benchmark studies, it was on the Surface. And so we were comparing the Windows Surface, the Google tablet, and then the iPad. And we were looking at the keyboards specifically. So the shapes of the key, the spacings of the key, and things like that. What people were saying as they were typing on the Google tablet was like, I'm so sorry. This is so embarrassing. I swear I know how to type. This is like super embarrassing. And I was just like taking all of this in, and I was like, wow, this not only is the iPad like keyboard substantially better, but like people do not feel stupid when they use it. People were actually ashamed of like their skill set while using a specific tablet. Like that to me was a big take home. So I tried to leave it into my presentation, and I said, okay, the shape of the keys obviously preferred with the iPad, and the spacing of the keys are definitely preferred on iPad, and all this other stuff that they were looking for. And then I also mentioned, oh, and by the way, when people use the tablet, they are saying things like, I'm sorry, I feel really stupid, and this is embarrassing. So we're actually making people feel something terrible as they use our product, not just frustration, but like, this is embarrassing. I swear I know how to type. I thought that was a pretty big thing. They didn't. And so that was when I decided, all right, this is not the place for me. And I went to nonprofit, which was like breaking up with the quarterback, apparently. So I left Google, I went to nonprofit, and I started as a researcher. They were working on adverse childhood experiences, toxic stress, trauma, and trying to understand the effects of it on the body and how we can mitigate it. So what they found were these 7 ways of doing it, which I became super interested in. But what I was wondering was like, can we turn this into an app? Like, can we have this be an app where teens can maybe use it and track these 7 domains of wellness, and we can maybe mitigate stress that way? And so I was already thinking, like, how do we scale this using tech? That was always my question, is how can I scale this using tech? They ended up taking to it a little bit, but what ended up happening is it basically became that I was like good at websites and I could probably design courses. So it was nothing about an app, but for whatever reason, when you tell somebody you're a doctor, they come with you with like all the ailments of like, what's wrong with this weird thing? And that was the same thing. I said I was into tech, and I became like a website person and designed courses, which again, not what I wanted to do, but I learned something from it, which was that when you design these courses around trauma, the content can be traumatizing. So not only was I learning about trauma, but I was also unpacking my own trauma as I was learning about trauma. So it became really difficult to design a good course, which got me thinking, wow, what if I was working on like a human trafficking website? I'd be a mess, right? Working on that content and the graphics, and I don't know if I could actually work on that. So I started to actually take note of like the topics and places that I couldn't present on or I couldn't create because I just felt really activated. So child abuse was one of them, and then substance abuse was the other one. Those were just 2 that I was just like, I not right now. So that got me into a different role within that organization, which was just like doing data and evaluation and product, and it was interesting, but I was like, this is not enough. There's something else. And that's when I started to spin off and do my own thing. That's when I started to create Dr. G's Lab. And it just started out as just like, let me just create a space for teams to come in and talk about their stuff, because there's got to be stuff that I'm not thinking about. And I really want to work with teams, and let me just get them in to think about stuff and to see what's behind, this big tech curtain. And it ended up not doing that right away. It ended up actually just people being like, hey, I'm starting this app. Would you mind taking a peek at it? Or like, hey, I'm doing this, or would you mind being a beta tester? And so again, not exactly what I wanted, but I kept learning was that people were really liking this and wanting this idea of like trauma, what I now call trauma-informed research and design. They were wanting more than just, does the button look right? Does the iconography work? Does the flow work? They wanted more than that. They wanted to know, like, hey, how did you feel when you were using it? What did you want to see? What would be awesome and why? And so I started offering those pieces of like knowledge in these 1 month live events. And people would come, and then I ended up having like guests come. And Dr. Keith Beasley came on, who was the founder of Emotional Intelligence. And he's from the UK. And so that was my first time like globally collaborating, where I realized I actually might really be onto something, but I just don't know exactly what it is and who these people are and all of this other stuff. But trauma was already part of my story now. And now UX was now part of my story. And so now I was really starting to figure out what the lab was capable of. So I stopped doing the live events because I started getting more and more projects. So now the projects are like, we want you to work with a group of high schoolers, and we're working on this app to connect high schoolers with college students. Can you come in and do the UX research and then, change the app as well? So now I'm like, okay, this is what I wanted to do. This is exactly what I wanted to do. So the trauma-informed stuff is happening, the research is happening, the youth stuff is happening. And to say that I got here by luck is like not true at all, like so far from it. But to say that I got here like by planning and a roadmap is also super far from it. So I just kept believing, I guess, in that there's more in tech for me. And I still think that there's more in tech for me, but I feel like I've just kind of scratched the surface of this stuff now.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of speaks to the idea of iteration and experimentation and trying things and continuous learning and kind of improvement. And
Yeah, totally. It reminds me of testing, which I think that you all do in like software, right? You have to test your software. And so for me, at least when I'm just learning like some, new database or something, I need to test it. And I feel like I was like testing each part of like what I had learned in the previous career or in the previous spot. So it felt like I was in like constant sandbox mode, but that was good. It was a good one.
yeah, no, yeah, it's very important to consider the user. I feel like in technology fields in general, particularly in the lab use space, we're so focused on the devices and the hardware and the software that we forget that there are actually people involved sometimes.
Yeah. I think probably with UX, we probably have a little bit more of the people side, but not as much. Like, right? Like if you're designing for like, example, I work for a huge insurance company, and you would think that you might get more interface with people who need the insurance, but you just run these giant user Zoom studies, multiple times. So you have this huge N of like 200, which is great. But like, did I actually talk to, that insurance customer? Like, no, I didn't. Right. So I still think that like UX research still very much removed, especially at the corporate level. I think it's still very much removed from the actual end user.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like most of your end users are like consumers versus for our audience, a lot of them are building test systems to test consumer devices. So there's a couple questions that could come out of that. One is, how do you test the UX of a device? Like so you're doing studies and looking at how people use it, but like, is there a way to automate some of that testing and make sure that those things work correctly? And then the other part of it is, does it change when the end user is not like an end consumer, but it's rather another employee or like a technician or something?
Yeah, I don't know if it really changes that much. I'm kind of thinking about like an experience where we have like database and I have to learn Salesforce, right? I don't know Salesforce, but somebody has to train me on building my, they have to build my page for me and then I have to know how to work it. I think that I don't know if you can automate that. I think you can automate some of it in terms of like just flows, right? Like does this flow? Are there bugs? But I don't know if you can actually automate the part of like, does this work for you? Does this dashboard look the way you want it to look? Is this field, are these fields where you want them? Is this object where you want it to be? And so I don't know if you can automate that without having an AI alongside, like, and like having like a chat, for example, if you need like a chat agent with you. So as you go through it, the chat could be there saying, is this where you would want it? Where would you want it if you could? Or if it's for something where software, it's like, is this a field that you would want, or is this a search, some query that you would want to run? And I don't know if you can automate that. I think you almost have to have a person do it until you can automate it. But I do think that AI is definitely going to be able to do it for sure. Not the human stuff of like, like Sam, what was it like to use that? But like for sure, like if a workflow is busted, I think that AI would be able to say like, oh, that didn't work out and recognize where the flow actually messed up.
Are you looking to accelerate your projects while ensuring future flexibility? Zaya Solutions' team of LabVIEW architects can help you realize your goals, from initial R&D prototyping through full-scale mission-critical deployments. With their extensive experience in test, automation, and systems integration, whether it's an actor framework program or a real-time distributed system, they'll get you up and running faster than ever. Learn more and check out their innovative open source utilities for the LabVIEW community at zayasolutions.com. That is ZYAH solutions.com.
That would be cool.
Yeah, so I think possibly trying to tie this back into more like the LabVIEW and the testing world. One of the things that I always advocate for developers is to go watch the end users use the program, right? And use the whatever it is. So like, for example, yeah, I've used this example a few times in the podcast, but like I worked on this project where they were testing soil samples, and to start the machine, there was like 10 different buttons you had to click, and you had to go on this screen and then that screen. And it was just really confusing. And so like just me standing there watching that, I was like, yeah, this is not the way to do it, but there's got to be a better way. But it's funny. It's almost like, I don't know if it's like Stockholm syndrome or something, but where like they're so used to doing it that convoluted way that like people actually resist change because they're like, well, I know how to do these 10 steps. And you're like, yeah, but it could be one step. So.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things that we could unpack in there. One is definitely resistance to change, even if it makes it simpler. That is a fascinating human behavior to me. And I would love to just chat it up with a social psychologist to figure out why. But even with data, right? Like we still have it. Like people are collecting data on like a spreadsheet and then putting it into Salesforce at the end of the year. That's like two different tasks and tracking it two different ways when you could just do it one way and you could just drop right into Salesforce like right away. But people don't want to do that. And then as for developers getting out to see it, that is super, super important. And it's funny because I assume that at some point that is done. Like even if it's just to watch videos or something of it. And so that's funny because I assume that engineers know what like how it's working. Wow. Okay. See, this is the stuff I need to hear. So I can be like, we need to better process of like cross team and cross pollination.
Well, I mean, part of it too might be like your experience. So I feel like working at a company like Google, like maybe Google is more progressive or more along that path. But like the people that I work with oftentimes are working in large industrial companies, military, government stuff that's highly regulated, and they're very much still stuck like waterfall siloed kind of thing where you have like one group that creates the requirements. And maybe they talk to the customer, or maybe they talk to a customer representative, and then they pass the requirements to the next people who do the design, and then the next people actually build it. And by the time it gets to the end, everyone's actually talked to a customer, period.
Wow. So are those things like fair? Like if I was like the DMV or something, like that web, like that, like portal, is that something that like an engineer would work on, like from the government, and then eventually gets to me as a user, and I'm like, why is this not working and this isn't in the right place? Is that like
That's probably like a cause of that. Yes. So like
okay?
I mean, the types of stuff that I'm talking about, like, so that's definitely a thing, and that's probably a symptom of the waterfall type method. But my world is more about like testing hardware, so testing like parts for airplanes and things like that, or medical devices and things like that. So that's kind of more of like the regulation side of it. So, like, you can imagine, right, the FDA, anything that goes inside your body or whatever has to be highly tested, or like a part for like a fighter jet or something has to be highly tested because, something goes wrong, that's a big deal. But,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I can imagine then somebody who's working on like a Dexicom for like diabetes or something. So you wouldn't be able to see the end user use it. And so you wouldn't get that feedback. And I don't even know if like the US researchers get to see then use it. They can ask about like the process and like what's it like when you put it on and then when you get your readings, and we can ask about the process. But we don't even get like videos. I mean, unless you're doing field studies, we very rarely get to actually see things in motion and actually, see it like live moving in motion, people using it, except for the benchmark studies, which was, having them have the tablet. But I never gave any of my information to software. Like that team didn't get anything. The engineers team, they didn't get anything. Design got my feedback, but the engineer team didn't get any of it. So
yeah, that's very interesting.
yeah, that is interesting. So what do you do if you're so tightly confined but you want to try to infuse some of this stuff in? Like, you're not going to be able to like get access to the users or anything like that, maybe. But how do you encourage, or if you're a developer that kind of stuck, how do you get that there?
Well, so what I've seen companies try to do is have like product owners. I think I don't know if you're familiar with like Scrum or whatever, but they have product owners who are the liaison between. It kind of feels to me like the guy in Office Space who's like, what's your job? Well, I take the specs for the customer, I give them to the engineer because I'm a people person. Kind of is like that. But yeah, that's what they do, right? You have one person who's the liaison to it. And in some ways, I kind of get that because, like, funneling the customer the customer conversation to one point of contact and making it easy for the customer, and then like they think that by insulating the team from the customer, right? Because the customer constantly wants to changes their mind about what they want, right? And they're focused on the process, and we have our requirements, we got to meet our requirements, and if they change it, then that's a change of scope and we have to do a change order, and right, they've got this whole process thing. But what they're missing is that like what the customer wants has changed. Well, we should change what we're building, right? Because ultimately, like, we're trying to solve the customer's problem, right? But they've
Right.
solving the customer's problem. They've like, it's like they've done this like local optimization of we're going to optimize for, you know, creating the software that we've already designed and built, and we don't care about what the customer wants anymore because we've already decided this is what they want because that's what they said 6 months ago.
And do they get this information like via survey or something? Is that how they find out?
Yeah, I go, well, so like in like these really dysfunctional waterfall organizations, like there's another group that designs like when I used to work for a company that built nuclear power plants, and like, they would have a site person who's on site at the power plant. They talk to some of the engineers and say, oh, we should build this product. Okay, great. Then they tell some product guy, and they do some Kaizen, and they all get together, and maybe they invite a few people from the customer, and they kind of decide what they think the customer wants. And then they hand it off to a group that designs it, and they'll design it, and, they'll order all the hardware that they need. And by the time, like, I was on the software team, by the time we started writing the software, right, we'd be ready to write the software. They would have a design review, right? And they'd want to know, like, what the software is going to look like. And we would kind of do a little design. But they'd already bought the hardware. And like we would go tell them, we'd be like, well, that hardware is not going to work for what we need. And they're like, well, sorry, we already bought it. It's like, well, what's the point of doing a design review once you've already decided? Like it was so dysfunctional. So
Mhm. Yeah. Do you feel like that's common still, or do you feel like that is like
I
a
don't know, it
one-off?
was super common in that company. So I can't imagine, I imagine they're not alone. But I mean, part of it is, in the nuclear industry, they're still stuck in like the 1950s. So
Sure. Yeah. 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 You're bringing up a good
they're heavily regulated, and that's probably a good thing. 'Cause
yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot of potential danger there. So
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, you're probably right. In terms of like getting the user's input and using the user's input, you probably want to weigh like how much risk is involved, right? Like a lot of times users don't know the ins and outs of a product, but they know how they want it to work and how they want it to function because it needs to solve something for them. But that could also be, you kind of have to take like a very different approach of like if it's good for one, it should be good for all. And so, if that's not exactly true, you kind of wonder how much the user should actually have input. Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely like, the user doesn't know what they know. Like, for example, a lot of times, I don't know, you might identify with this, but on like a particular forum where they're talking about like programming stuff, somebody will be like, oh, how do I do X? Right. And it's a very specific, like, how do I create this particular piece of code? But
Mhm.
then you, but like, it's obvious from their question that there's like more context. And so it's like, well, what problem are you trying to solve? And they're trying to solve a completely different problem, but somewhere they read that this is the way to do it. So they're trying to figure out how to do this little thing in code. But that thing by itself does not solve their problem. It may not even be the best way to solve their problem.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's right. People are definitely taking things out of context a lot more because of how quick things are, which I don't know if it's I don't know if it will ever make its way to technology, but it's made its way to fashion. So there's this thing called fast fashion and slow fashion. And fast fashion is this idea of like theory, like you don't really think about the idea behind it. You like mass product it, it's really like not great thread. And the idea is you get it out to a lot of people and there's a lot of it. And then there's slow fashion, and usually that product is a cheaper, more affordable. And then there's slow fashion, which is, it's batch made. There's already it's sustainable. The cotton is sustainable. All of this stuff, and the person who designs it is like one person, rather maybe not one person, but there's like maybe like two, but not like this giant team that passes it on to this that doesn't even know if the user likes the length of sleeve, right? So it's like there's less people between the producer and the user. And for that reason, everything is a bit slower, but it's also more sustainable in terms of, it costs like $185 for a shirt, for example, instead of like $65. But because of that, that person knows exactly the quality they're going to get. They know the fit they're going to get. Everything is really like the trust is huge and people are willing to put that money in there in that investment because the trust they know what they're going to get and it's consistent. So I don't know if that will transfer over to tech eventually, but I love the idea of slow tech. Like, let's not have these like multiple sprints that are only like 2 hours long and must not do 8-week projects. Like, what if we actually slowed down the process where we could have engineering look at how this is being used? That was part of like the discovery phase, right? Or where you didn't have to pre-order the pieces before having the design. So again, like I don't think it will cross over to all tech, but I do feel like there's ways for us to do this a lot slower and a lot more sustainable, not only for the product or services, but like for us creating it. Like it is just super fast paced and super iterative sometimes. And that's just like a straight to burnout. So
Yeah. Well, thinking about that, I think of like the motto of like move fast and break stuff. And the problem is they
yep.
break a lot of stuff and they don't necessarily always fix the stuff that they break. So that's part of it. And the other part is too, the move fast and break stuff doesn't really take into account sometimes like the unintended consequences and the long-term consequences of some of these things. Some things you have to observe over a period of time before you notice the adverse effects, I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And especially in something that's not like at the top scene, right? Like a product or service where you can like give immediate feedback, where you can experience something right away. Like there's with I think with software, there's not a receptive moment like there is for other products and services where like if I put on a shirt and I roll my sleeve up and there's like a hidden tag, like that's a moment of reception where I'm like, oh, this is why I love this shirt. You don't really get that unless you're the user, the technical user of it, right? When you're like something works, you're like, yeah, this is why I love this software. That doesn't really happen that often. So I don't know if there's like a moment of reception that happens where people don't, they're just not like investing in this idea that if you miss the reception, you actually have to fix that part. Like if you don't actually, you have to come back and you have to fix it. So it might be a thing too.
I don't know. I think to your comment though, I think like in my mind, I think software works the best when it disappears, right? Like software is supposed to be a tool to solve the problem. The best software, you don't even realize you're using it, right?
That's
Like
fair.
you're editing a picture and you're not even thinking about Photoshop. You're thinking about the picture you're editing, right? Or you're typing a Word document and your thoughts just flow and you don't have to worry about, oh, I got to add a header here and I got to bold this and italics, realign my paragraph.
That's true.
Gets out of the way and just lets you naturally flow. I feel like that's the best state of software.
Yeah.
Disappearing.
Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Absolutely. I never really thought of it that way. So there's almost like a silent reception of just like, that was so easy. I didn't even realize I did that task. That's how easy that was. That's probably that moment.
Well, back to your phone thing and the typing, right? Like an iPhone, like I type anymore and it's an extension of my thought. Like I think the word and I don't even think about like moving my thumbs and hitting the keys. The word just appears, right? Because it's all kind of just like so smooth and natural, right? Versus like typing the things and it's constantly trying to autocorrect you and correcting the, like Microsoft Word, for example, total example of like the bad UI, right? Because you're typing and it's auto-correcting, it's picking the wrong word, and you're always like, no, that's not the word I want, right? And you lose your train.
Right. Yeah, that is a really good point. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. And you bring up a good point because I was thinking about this. Grammarly. Have you ever used Grammarly?
Yes, I love Grammarly. I think it's great.
I love Grammarly. It is fantastic. And so I was thinking, wouldn't it be really cool if there was a Grammarly for like inclusive language, so that if you were saying something like, "You let me shoot that email off to you," that it would pick up like, "Oh, you said shoot," is this might be a word that could be offensive or could cause harm. And I was just like, this is something that I need. How do I build it? And then I started thinking about that, and so now I think I understand what this is all about. I think I get it now.
Yeah, no, I think I need that because I always catch myself saying like, like I'll type out an email and say you guys, and I'm like, no, I should probably say you all or y'all or something.
Right. Yeah.
It's subtle little things, and it's like, you're so accustomed to it, you've done it so often, and it's like, but if it could just like, even if it could just auto correct it and just like behind the scenes, like take that out, that's so useful. Like, for example, the one thing I like, I do a lot of Python programming. I don't know how much actual programming you do, but there's something for Python called Black, and it's like this auto formatter. So you type this stuff, and you don't have to worry about, like, in Python, there's like some rules. They're not like hard rules, but like, oh, after you write an equal sign, you should put a space on either side, to make it more readable, and then like, right, like spacing stuff and white space. And it's kind of a pain to remember all those things. And with Black, you just type it, and the IDE like auto saves a file and it automatically corrects and adjusts it as you're typing.
Oh, nice.
But you don't have to think about it at all, right? You just
it's like a auto best practice or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like word autocorrect, but like if it actually worked, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Actually did what you wanted, and it didn't even like you typed it and you misspelled something, just automatically swapped the letters and didn't even and always got
kind
of like
yes. Okay. Yeah. So this would be a software thing that I would be building then. Am I getting that right? If I were to build a Grammarly for inclusive language, that is what I would be doing.
Yeah. I mean, I bet Grammarly, like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there might already be one out there or something. Or I don't know, it might be easier to like take an existing platform, excuse me, and just kind of add that in, right? I don't know.
Mhm. That's cool. Okay. I
Yeah,
love
and
that.
maybe somebody from Grammarly's listening and will go add that. I don't know.
Yeah. Or not and just let me do it. That's fine
Yeah,
too.
yeah, we don't want to steal your idea. That is
I am taking a product management certification coming up soon, and I'm wondering, like what sort of things I'll be learning in product management that would be similar to what you do, and like, well, yeah, I feel like there's so much crossover, and then there's also no crossover in some places.
well, I do like the idea. So you said product with a D, right? Not project.
Product with a
I
D.
very
That's
much
right.
like the idea of product versus project management, particularly.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to software, but I think in general in life, like it's not like it's not typically like you build something and then it's just done forever, right? Like the bridge in your
Sure.
back there, right? Like they didn't build that bridge as a project. Like they built it as a project, but they still have to maintain that, right? So they have to go back and repave it and redo things all the time. And so like software is very much like that. And I feel like we shoot ourselves in the foot when we do this project management because we just try to get it done by the deadline and then we just forget about it for a year or two. And then we have another project to go back and fix it. And I feel like having a
Mhm.
product mindset of like going into it knowing it's going to be a long-term thing and a long-term relationship and that it's going to need maintenance and it's going to like grow and adjust over time, I think is a really useful way of thinking about things.
Interesting. So there's more weight, or I guess maybe you're more apt to have a project manager than you are to have a product manager in some of the work you're doing.
Oh yeah, no, they definitely still have that product
Wow.
mindset. And I think like, yeah, I think it's just to me, it's the short-term versus long-term mindset, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
versus a product, it kind of goes to, I don't know if you've listened to Simon Sinek at all, but his like, was it The Infinite Game, right? Where there's like, there's no,
Okay. Yeah.
never ends. It's the goal is to keep going.
That's right. That's right. So it brings, yeah, that does actually translate with this idea of like slow tech then, because the idea is like what you were just saying, which is like it's a long process. Like it's not just like a one-time thing and boom, we're good to go. Like we need to actually think about it as like a life cycle, right? And not just like this one-time project. And that is more of a long-term, slower, drawn out, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you miss your timeline or that you draw your timeline out by like 2 years or something, but it's more of just having, rather than having a project management, you have that, but you also have this product management, which gives you that whole different, like, different view.
Yeah.
Okay.
It also doesn't mean that you can't take that long-term view and break it down into short-term things and iterate quickly
Absolutely.
things. It's just the goal is not the short-term iteration. The goal is the
That's
long-term
right.
way you get there.
Right.
Short iterations, I think.
I love this. Yeah, this is exactly what. Okay, I'm very glad I'm taking the certification then, because it sounds like it's going to really line up with the how I really want other, sectors in tech to think about things. So I'm glad that I'll be able to add that hopefully to another
Oh,
product management to
I
another
think
project.
a lot of life would be a lot better if people thought more of long term. I mean, I think like, you look at like corporate America and it seems like they're all so obsessed with quarterly earnings and this and that. And it would seem like a lot of times companies shoot themselves in the foot to make their quarterly earnings. And then, like the companies that like lay a bunch of people off to make their quarterly earnings. And immediately the next quarter, they're like, oh crap, we got to hire a bunch of people. And they're like constantly playing
Yeah.
these short term goals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I see it all the time. Yeah.
Well, I think some of that goes to like the incentive structures that we build too. So, but
Mm.
if
Yeah.
you're a CEO, you're incentivized on the quarterly stock price. Like, of course you're going to go chase that. And I think that applies in technology and stuff too. Like, how do we incentivize people correctly, right? With how do we reward people when they deliver a great user experience, as opposed to like, oh, we delivered it on time. Well, that's great, but is it the experience?
Right. Yeah.
May not be an easy answer to that question, but
Gosh, that's it. It's interesting because only once in one job have I been asked, "How do you like to be shown praise?" And I think that it kind of comes down to that of like I know when I was working in the larger insurance company, we would do these things within teams that were like kudos or team praise or something like that, where you would drop it in and everybody would know that you did a great job on the design crit or the great right or something like that. But I don't know if as a UX researcher, if you don't actually get time to again slow down and celebrate that you did a great project or a great product or whatever it is, and you don't get actual feedback or you don't get to see the actual feedback of the user presented to you, not you going and finding it, but your director or your manager or whatever presenting user feedback to you. I don't know if you ever get time to actually celebrate or not, but to even say that I did a good job because everything you're on to the next thing already from there.
I think feedback is very important for learning, right? Because if you do something
Huge.
and the feedback is delayed, right? So like I'm trying to think of the best way to say it, but like a kid does something in school, they do something and they do what they're supposed to do. That's great. But if you reward them like a week later, right, they've already forgotten what, and they don't connect those two things, right? Versus if they do it and you immediately give them the feedback. And so, I mean, that's my
Yeah.
kind of trying to get away from the old school, like waterfall, very slow process of getting things out the door is to get things out the door quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Get better feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge bonus of getting if you get things out quicker with the trade-off being you get feedback quicker,
Yeah.
then yeah, right? But I don't know again, like how have you in the past received feedback on something that you created or designed?
Well, usually in corporate America, it's the yearly review, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
you have a yearly review in December, and you have a big project and it ends in like February or March, and you do a great job.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? You don't hear it,
No.
right? And so in the
No.
meantime, employees are super demoralized because they're like, I, I thought I did great at this project, and nobody gave me any kudos or whatever. And then you come around in January, and by that point, it's too late, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
in that meantime, you do another crappy project that turns out crappy, and then you get reviewed, and you get the review on the crappy project, but they completely
Yep.
miss the good one, right? And it just
Yeah.
disconnect.
Yeah, it is disconnect. So performance reviews for me are performative, in general. So when I have had to give a performance review, I generally will meet with my team and I will say, I feel like this is a performative event right now. Like me having to fill this out feels performative. What I would like to do is give you fours all the way down because everybody has room for learning. And then we have SMART goals. We do one-on-one supervision, whatever it is. But I have not, um, I have yet to take a performance review as a manager, uh, seriously to the point where I'm like actually looking at their performance over a year because I can't. I personally don't have that. If I had an AI that could like understand what they did and look at all their projects or something like that, maybe. But if it's not human and me looking at them over the course of a year. I don't have that much context, especially with remote work. How can I possibly review somebody over an entire year when I barely even see them in the office or, have like any like communal interactions with them?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's
Everybody gets bored.
an artifact of corporate culture because I feel like if you work with somebody, they do a really good job and they nail something, like say, "Hey, that was a great job. You did."
Yeah.
Yeah, just like
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I do feel like too, like sales and marketing, it's really easy to get that, if we're just kind of distilling it to just straight applied behavioral analysis, it's really easy to get that reinforcement and get that reward, right? Because you get the promotion or you get the sale, like the whatever it's tied to your commission or what have you. So you kind of get that immediate feedback and that immediate reward. And so you want to continue doing what you're doing and doing it well. But with especially I think with the back end stuff and like UX, and UI and software, I think that it's so delayed that it's not that we've become learned helpless because we're not getting it's not like we're getting we're just not trying to avoid something bad. but we're certainly not getting a reward to make us want to do the thing that we're doing over and over again. And so I think a lot of us look to side projects, right? I think a lot of us look to side, communities and side things to keep our passion cup full. And I'm not saying that that's good, bad, or indifferent, but I wonder what the world would look like if we did take that, very stimulus response and see what happens with the behavior and help it increases. What would happen if we actually did that immediate feedback? Would people still want to work on their side passions, or would that be enough? I really don't know.
Well, one of the problems is when we do good things, we don't get immediate feedback. When we do bad things, we do get immediate feedback. That's what,
Exactly.
right? Because you
Yeah.
set something up, people don't wait for the performance review to tell you that, right? So that's like an interview. And I listened to something interesting, and I think it was Scott Ford was talking about, like, in software, right? When we run software, you click the run hour and your software runs. If it runs correctly, you don't get any feedback. It just runs. But if like there's a database error or something, or it doesn't compile, right, it immediately spits this negative message at you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like we've internalized that into business, in that if you do your job and everything goes well, no feedback.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you screw up, then immediately, oh, why'd you screw up? Oh my God, that's the end of the world, and everybody's running around. And it's
Yeah. 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 And I don't know if it's a patriarchal way of looking at it, but I think we do it with our kids too, in some ways, right? Like kids just kind of like go on scene, you're doing good, but then the second you like break something, get a bad grade or something, right? Like that's when we intervene. So I don't know where it comes from, but it is a very kind of supreme reign of I see you, and when you do bad, I will definitely tell you. The goal is for you to do good, so I don't see you. That is the goal. And so I think you're totally right. Our machines are doing the same thing. Like even, I mean, even a door, right? Like if you push the door and it doesn't open because it's a pull, you're immediately like, oh shit, the door didn't open, right? Like it's not, but it's not this like this like red error or like something, right? And it's interesting. I think when I hear noises attached to hardware too. So like if I'm scanning something at the grocery store, for example, everything's nice and calm, like beep beep. But if something goes wrong, it's like a customer needed to touch it. It's like so loud and jarring that I'm like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I stole something. So when I start to see hardware and things like that do the auditory cues, not just the visual cues, but the auditory ones, that's when I'm like, oh wow, we really need to be a little bit softer on when a user makes an error, or when the software makes an error, or something doesn't compute, because it is very loud if you do something wrong.
Yeah. So there's a couple ways I want to go with this conversation, but the first one is I was talking to somebody, I forget who, and they were talking about language, and how in language we don't have a lot of words for the normal state. We have like one word for like the normal state of something.
Totally.
When things are
Yeah.
out of normal, we have tons of words for those things.
Yeah.
And it kind of relates to that, like, when things are good, we just kind of ignore them. Like we just expect things to go well, and it's like the normal state. So I think
Yep.
that,
Yep.
and then your part about like hardware making loud noise and stuff. I think in software too, I have a project I'm working on right now, and they have these errors, and it's like, it's talking to a piece of hardware or something, right? And so the cable comes disconnected. But the error note doesn't say the cable become disconnected. It says Visa error at blah, blah, blah. And it spits out this big long number and this big chunk of things that to the developer means something, but to the end user means nothing, right? And oftentimes I see, and I do this, I'm as guilty as anybody else. In the software, we just get that error, we just bubble it up and throw a pop-up at the user that says, hey, there's this problem. And that's not entirely like, it's somewhat useful in that, like, if you can't figure it out, okay, great, you copy and paste that and you send it off to the developer and they know what's going on. But putting up an error message that says, hey, the cable came disconnected, reconnect it, that right? It's like super easy.
Yeah. Yeah, that is helpful. I think you're right. I've never really thought about the error messages that I get that are helpful versus the ones that I don't get. I've gotten ones that say like generic, like this is an error type 2156, whatever. And then I get like a little icon to click for more information, which is not helpful at all. Like it's not helpful for me anyway. It's probably helpful for somebody. But what I worry about is the avoidant users. And I know we're out of time, but the avoidant users who don't click around and who don't like try to sandbox, they're going to be the ones to call the customer care line. And businesses are focused on getting people away from the customer care line. And so I worry what we're going to be doing for our avoidant users who get that pop up and they're like, okay, well, what? I'm just going to pick up my phone and call. But there's less and less people there to answer that phone call. So,
Well, I think that goes to the human factor and the UI UX stuff too. Is creating user manuals and creating YouTube tutorials and videos and stuff so that people can self help. Because I mean that's better for the person because they don't have to call and wait on hold and all that. It's better for the business because it's cheaper to make those videos and to staff a call center, right? So
yeah.
It's been a great conversation. It went in some very interesting and surprising areas. So I'm very.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. If you find that reference to the language, I am super interested in that of like, there's only like one or two normal words for normal, but just a slew of them for abnormal. That is really fascinating. Really fascinating.
Yeah, I have to try to remember where I heard that.
Cool. Awesome.
All right.
So good to see you, Sam. All right. Take care.
That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the LV Experiment.